The morning in Kunar was like a cracked mirror. Sunlight filtered through a thin layer of mist, creating hard streaks of light on the rocks. The desert wind whipped through the tents, carrying the smell of diesel fuel, smoke, and the metallic scent of weapons. In a small medical tent, under a flickering flashlight, Sarah Martinez checked every syringe, every roll of bandage, every emergency clamp. Her nursing kit had become a ritual, each movement repeated almost in time with her heartbeat. Sarah had never wanted to be here. She had dreamed of being a doctor in a quiet town, hearing children laugh, not explosions and screams. But life had brought her here, from medical school to the field med bay, to the position of someone who could decide between life and death in a few breaths. She carried a lingering preference: calm. It was something her father, a former Marine sniper, had instilled in her since she was a little girl, taking her to the shooting range and teaching her to be patient rather than afraid. The radio suddenly turned on, breaking the morning routine. The order was urgent. Bravo team under heavy contact. Grid 75. 2 down, 1 critical. Sarah didn't hesitate. All the theory, all the rules of mission assignment, all vanished at the sight of her comrades groaning on the ground. She stuffed the medicine bag into her backpack, threw her light armor over her shoulder, and dashed out of the tent. The Humvee rumbled across the rocky trail, kicking up waves of sand. Roadside gunfire echoed through the air like needles. When they arrived, the sight shattered all plans. Smoke billowing from a crippled vehicle, blood smeared on hot rocks, seals scattered, some trying to find cover. Sarah threw herself down beside the wounded soldier, her hands working in a reflex she'd repeated hundreds of times, applying bandages, applying a tourniquet, reading vital signs. But there was another warning in her head: a single shot, a crisp, clean sound, unlike a machine gun. A bullet ripped through the mud near her knee. Everyone backed away, searching for the source. People looked up at the cliff. There was a sniper there. Suddenly, the whole battle stopped at a focus point. Move. But how when an invisible eye was locked on every move? The team was trapped under pinpoint fire. In that moment, Sarah felt something alert, very different from the emotions that had flooded her as a medic. She began to calculate altitude, distance, wind, the kind of information a medic shouldn't need. But the lessons from her childhood at the shooting range, the times her father had taught her to keep quiet, to calculate the wind direction, came back to her like a line of code loaded into her memory. She saw a Barrett 50 cal lying next to the gunner's body, a body lying prone, the weapon still loaded, its barrel aimed at the cliff. No one stopped her. Anders, the commanding officer, shouted at her back, "Martinez, you can't!" She only nodded in response, her eyes determined. She crawled toward the gun, put her cheek against the stock, felt the weight, felt her own pulse reflected in the cold metal. The barrel was slightly bent, the bipod stiff, just as she remembered. People looked at her in bewilderment, a doctor with a large caliber gun that weighed more than she did, but Sarah saw only one thing: a chance to regain control of the men under fire. The first shot seemed to blow away all her hasty thoughts. The recoil slammed into her shoulder. A physical blow, but also one that sent her into a different state, total concentration. Then, a moment of silence, and then the glint on the cliff was gone. The sniper was gone. Murmurs of praise, relieved smiles, and then back to work. Sarah didn't smile. She turned, sat down next to the wounded man, and continued her rescue as if it had been only a temporary interruption. In the settling dust, her comrades' eyes found her with a mixture of respect and wonder. They called her Doc, but today they called her something else, with both admiration and mystery. Sarah knew she had changed, but the change wasn't like a new badge on her shoulder. It was a thin shell, glued on by the things she'd experienced. Before nightfall, she sat in a corner of the tent, looking up at the starry sky, her hands still shaking slightly. A voice spoke inside her, not fear, not regret, but a question. Who will I be from now on? As the sun sank, a dry chill crept up from the mountains, dispelling the humidity of the day. The story of the day on Ridge 7 spread like a small fire in a haystack. One person told it, another added to it. But in the midst of it all, Sarah felt a private silence, not pride, but disappointment. The shot had saved her comrades, but it had also left a void inside her. The sight of the gun, the smell of gunpowder, the sound of metal on skin. The next morning, orders came. Another mission awaited. They left the base to a small village where people took refuge from the approaching convoy. There was a sense of calm before the storm. Doors slammed, figures ducked in the bushes, and something in the air that made Sarah feel uneasy. When the Humvee stopped, the screaming was deafening. RPGs flying, explosions. It all happened in a flash. Screams, shattering glass, flames. Sarah held a badly wounded soldier, quickly bandaged him, trying to keep him conscious. All around her, chaos. Then from the cliff, 3 flashes of gunfire flashed like needles, calling out the name of the danger she had learned by heart. Sarah looked up. In the same place, the 3 snipers she had learned the day before. Her heart clenched, but her hands worked, unconsciously and professionally. Again, the silent expression appeared, calculating, timing, watching the enemy's breathing. She didn't wait for permission. The guard beside her gave her a look. "How did you do that?" She answered with a single action. Put Barrett down, counted, pulled the trigger. Each shot was a direct answer to the one who had tried to destroy them. When the last bullet left the barrel, the 3 shadows on the cliff collapsed, silent. Moments later, the battle became more chaotic, but culminated in the team regaining the initiative. Anders came to her, eyes tired but questioning. "Aren't you afraid?" he asked. Sarah just looked at him, eyes as bewildered as a soldier after a battle. "Sure. But then there's them." The answer was simple, raw, but filled with enough loyalty to justify every action. After the battle, reports were sent to the command. Someone suggested sending her for formal training as a marksman. The higher-ups considered a medic with sniper skills could be a great asset. But Sarah shook her head as she stood before the colonel, refusing to leave the squad. "They need me here," she said. It was a decision not just because of the mission, but also because of the faces that lay beside her, the sighs of relief, the warm handshakes before they left. The night after the battle, as the team gathered around the small fire, there was laughter, there was wine, but there were also solemn looks. Tanner, the young soldier who had hesitated when she used a gun, put his hand on her shoulder and chuckled. "You saved our lives. Thanks, Doc." And Anders, in a moment of silence, seemed to find the words. "You're more than just a nurse today. You're ours." The truth was, Sarah wasn't looking for praise. She felt deeply the disconnect between healing and holding a gun. Every time she pulled the trigger, she saw images of people shot, heard the gunshots echo in her head. She had to learn to live with them, not be consumed by them, but acknowledge their existence and continue to heal those who remained. The reward, if any, is the survival of those around her. But that reward also comes with a burden. The faces of enemies, the sights of fire, the calls of names in her dreams. Sarah knows her path is twofold, to preserve lives and to be willing to end one life to save many. It is a fine line she walks every day. The following days did not ease that uncertainty. Each battle brought a new question. What was the right course of action? And what would she pay for her decision that morning on Ridge 7? But for every sleepless night, there were always mornings when a laugh, a joke, a hand on the shoulder reminded her that she was not alone. It was what got her up, going, and opening her backpack each morning, not just for her medicine, but for courage. The missions came in waves, each wave a story, each story a choice. Sarah gradually realized that war doesn't allow for long pauses to think. It forces you to act and leaves consequences to carry with it. But in the midst of the chaos, she noticed something strange. She began to understand both sides of the profession, the saving of lives and the ending of lives. Once they were deployed to a small valley, the alarm was high. Villagers fled ahead of the convoy, their eyes wide as they stared at the strange soldiers. Anders signaled them to slow down. They stopped, but not before. A surprise attack came. An RPG hit a Humvee, sending a fiery ball of fire. Screams, shattered glass, shards of metal cutting through the air. A young soldier was wounded in the smoke. Sarah rushed forward, pressing haphazardly against the wound in his heart, searching for an airway. As she focused on the fragile life before her, 3 dark shapes appeared on the hillside, where the sniper had been. They had learned their lesson the day before. Strike quickly, hit the team's weak spot. Sarah heard the gunshot. She saw the 3 flashes on the stone floor. In that split second, she had a choice. Continue to save the people in range or find a way to neutralize the source of the damage? It wasn't a jumble of fear anymore. It was an instinct honed by practice. Keep the team in place, stop the source of the fire. What followed was like something out of an action movie, but with a searing realism. She crawled up a mound of sand, loaded a bullet, and took aim. In the moment she pulled the trigger, everything else faded away, only the target, the scope, and her own breathing. The first shot hit, the second, the third, a final answer to whoever had targeted them. As the sound passed through her ears, she felt a slight sadness. Each target fell was a person who had a family, who had a dream. As the chaos subsided, the survivors gathered. The young soldier she had saved was breathing heavily, but he was alive. Anders circled around, looking at his comrades, then stopped in front of Sarah. "You did well," he said, his voice rough but powerful. She returned the tired look. The compliments were not enough to ease her sense of loss. She wondered, was there a world where she could be a healer, not a killer? After the battle, word reached higher command. Some saw the benefits: formal training for Sarah as a marksman, a combination of medical engineering and sniping, creating a rare breed of soldier. Some called it a tactical advance. Others called it a career twist. Sarah listened but didn't respond. Her choice was to be here with the team, in a position where she could save lives and, when necessary, put the bullet to save more lives. Late at night, she would sit alone, looking out at the distant hills, remembering the faces of the men who had fallen under her gun. Sometimes she found herself smiling, because they were still alive. Sometimes she found herself crying silently, because the image haunted her. Her emotions were mixed, giving her no easy way out. But with each passing day, she felt herself growing stronger. Not because she wanted to fight, but because she understood more about the boundary between life and death. The truth is, Sarah didn't become a shooter. She became someone who accepted that in some situations, the only option was to act immediately and decisively to save the lives of others. It wasn't a glory, it was a responsibility. And it was that responsibility, more than any title, that made her teammates call her by a new name, one of their own. Life on the front continued. There was laughter, there was storytelling, there was singing around the campfire. With each laugh, Sarah realized they lived, they existed, and therefore her every action had meaning. But that meaning could not erase the sleepless nights, could not erase the image of each bullet piercing the ground. It was just a thin layer around her heart, allowing her to go on. A season passed slowly. The journeys, the vigils, the rescues, and the shootings became a cacophony Sarah learned to listen to. Each mission was a different chapter, sometimes tedious, sometimes breathtakingly tense. The repetition of events made her accustomed to the feeling, but never an easy habit. Her superiors approached her a couple of times about formal sniper training. They saw a strategic advantage. Someone with both medical skills and long-range strike ability could tip the balance. There were meetings, colonels sitting stoically, scribbling on paper. But with each request, Sarah felt a growing internal conflict. If she accepted, she would leave her team, leaving her position close to the people she had saved. If she refused, she would remain as she was, a healer who occasionally carried a gun. She remembered the face of her father, the man who had taught her sniping as an art. Sniping isn't about killing, it's about protecting. But now, in the dust of war, the words seemed stretched. They no longer seemed so simple. Part of her wanted to learn to protect better. Part of her feared losing her true self, the one who put healing first. During an all-night assault, Sarah found herself once again in an untenable position. They were ambushed in a remote area. Radio communications were jammed. Their comrades were scattered. A support brigade could not arrive in time. She worked tirelessly, bandaged with one hand, tossed a flash grenade with the other, making preliminary tactical preparations. And when the enemy revealed their position on the cliff, she saw the two images superimposed, the operating table and the scope. After the storm, when the dust had settled, Anders looked for her in the darkness. "Do you hear them calling?" he asked. The question was simple and profound. They meant more than just her comrades. They meant her loved ones, the patients who had looked to her with hope. Sarah bent down, her hand reaching for the stubbed-out cigarette butt, staring into space. "I hear," she said, her voice weak and firm. but I might be standing between them. Her decision wasn't easy. She knew each choice would have consequences. Sniper training wasn't just training, it was a shift in identity. She thought about the future. Would she be able to return to being a medic in a peaceful town? Would what she'd done on the battlefield stay with her? The answer didn't come immediately, but what she accepted was the fact that no matter where she stood, she would continue to save lives, either medically or in the form of tactical defense. One afternoon, an Afghan child ran up to her and took her hand, her eyes full of trust. A small but meaningful moment. Beyond all the tactics and violence, there was one thing that kept Sarah grounded, the reason she did it all. It was those faces, the laughs that snuck in through the night, the whispered thanks. They reminded her that even in the darkest of places, she could still choose humanity. In the end, Sarah refused to leave the training camp, not because she wasn't afraid, but because she believed that it was with these people that she could be of greatest value. She would continue to be a healer, but also a protector when needed. That decision didn't stop her from questioning her moral compass. It just made her accept living within it. Time passed, the mission ended, and the day of return came. The survivors hugged, raised their glasses, and told stories both bitter and humorous. There was crying, there was laughter. But for Sarah, the parting was not all joy. It was the closing of a chapter filled with blood and gratitude. Back in Texas, she stepped off the plane with an old backpack and a heart full of memories. The country roads, the ripening fields, the sound of the wind. Everything seemed so peaceful compared to what she had experienced. Neighbors greeted her, children ran and played, and daily life continued as slowly as before. But in her mind, Ridge 7 was still there. The sounds, the smell of gunpowder, the faces of her comrades, the smile of the young soldier she had saved. Sarah tried to find a new life. She volunteered at a small clinic, treating trivial injuries, counseling veterans. Every time she picked up the stethoscope to listen to a patient's heartbeat, she remembered the hearts she had saved on the battlefield. Sometimes she felt relief. Other times, sadness washed over her like a sudden wave. In the years since, former teammates have called her, come to her house with a bottle of wine, and reminisced. They've recalled the day she transformed from medic to sniper, a mixture of pride and awe. To Tanner, Anders, and the others, she'll always be the one who ran into the line of fire to save them. But to Sarah, she's the one with a different perspective, the one who understood that every decision, even the righteous one, has a price. Once a neighbor asked her, "Do you regret it?" Sarah was silent for a few seconds, looking out at the fields, thinking of the faces and the voices. "I have sleepless nights," she said sincerely. "But if I hadn't done that, they wouldn't have lived." It wasn't an apologetic answer. It was the simple truth, acknowledging both the pain and the obligation. There were nights when Sarah lay listening to the wind, her eyes staring up at the starry sky, just like the nights in Kunar. She remembered every look, every handshake, the sighs when the dead returned. Sometimes she still thought about going to school to become a marksman. Maybe if she had chosen differently, life would have been different, but she had no regrets. Life had given her a dual role, to save and to protect. She used that role to preserve as many lives as she could. And perhaps that's what she'll tell her grandchildren. About a day on Ridge 7, when a medic became a sniper in seconds, when a squad of soldiers found hope in an extraordinary act. The story isn't just about the actions of one man. It's about how people change in the face of life and death. About courage, about choices, and about what we bring home, not weapons or medals, but memories and responsibilities. Sarah still goes to work every day. She still holds on to the small piece of paper her father gave her, a simple sentence: "Keep who you are." It's a reminder, not just for her, but for anyone who has ever been caught between two callings. And as the wind blows across the Texas fields, she smiles, closing a chapter, but knowing the memory will always be there. A part of her, a part of the people she saved.